I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is I-24 News. Here are tonight's headlines. Hezbollah is stepping up attacks against northern Israel from Lebanon. Tensions are simmering between Egypt and Israel as Cairo threatens to downgrade ties. And Jordan has foiled an Iranian-led plot to arm opponents of the Jordanian government. Well, it's day 222 of the Israel-Hamas war, but much of the focus in Israel today is in the north, where the fighting is heating up. The Israeli army says that at least 60 rockets have been fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel in just one barrage today, although we saw even more sirens being triggered in northern Israel as the day went on. Now, the Hezbollah terror group has claimed responsibility for that attack, claiming that it hit an Israeli army base on the border with Lebanon, but the IDF has not confirmed this. This comes after Hezbollah leader Nasrallah met with senior Hamas officials to discuss the ongoing war with Israel. Hezbollah has been firing rockets into northern Israel on a near daily basis since October 8th in a show of so-called support for Gaza. And last night, an Israeli civilian was killed by an anti-tank missile that was fired from Lebanon towards the northern community of Kibbutz Adamit. Well, Israel has been hitting back in response, and today Hezbollah says that one of its operatives was killed after having been targeted by an alleged Israeli airstrike on a car in southern Lebanon. Well, joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent Balir Sladin. Balir, are we seeing an escalation take place at this point? What is the latest on the ground?
Well, definitely this could be considered as an escalation. In the past couple of weeks, the usual tit for tat was, the usual tit for tat was going with between Israel and Hezbollah. But in the last 24 hours, we've seen this escalation from Hezbollah's side. It started when they launched a series of anti-tank missiles to Admit, where one civilian was killed and 4 soldiers were wounded, and also as a result of the same attack, one surveillance balloon has fallen in Lebanon, actually. So Israel decided to retaliate for that, and apparently Israel killed that senior commander, and now we're seeing this retaliation from Hezbollah to that assassination of the senior commander yesterday. And the large barrage of rockets contained not only the usual rockets that Hezbollah launches, they are saying that they used Katyusha rockets as well as heavy rockets and also artillery shelling for the Mount Meron. We reminded that this is a sensitive strategic site for Israel here in the north, and they are targeting it for months now. And apparently this attack, according to the IDF, was or caused only a minor damage, but still an escalation from Hezbollah's side. It didn't stop there. They also about 2 hours ago targeted another site in Rosh Hanikra. They said that they targeted it with artillery shelling, and this is happening while we haven't been seeing any announcement from the Israeli side of any retaliatory attacks on southern Lebanon, although some sources in Lebanon are saying that Israel did attack with airstrikes right there in the villages in the south. Now, this is happening, and we've seen also, or we've heard actually, what Gallant has said, the Israeli defense minister, that they are, like the Israelis, are getting close to either agreeing with Lebanon or Hezbollah actually, and or to actually go and go for an operation in the north. He didn't call it a war, he called it an operation. He has been seeing this for a while now, but apparently the increase of the pressure is coming from the residents here. 80,000 evacuated their homes with no deadline of when they are coming back. And also yesterday, the Israeli authorities told the hotels and the hostels that they are that where these evacuee citizens are, that they might be there up until the end of this year, something that of course raised the anger from those residents.
All right, Balir, thank you so much for joining us from northern Israel. I'd like to turn to our guests in the studio. We have former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Dani Ayalon, and intelligence and defense commentator Yossi Melman. So, Yossi, I'd like to turn to you first. Hezbollah has made it clear that it will not or it will continue waging war on northern Israel until Israel stops its war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Where does this leave Israel at this point? Is there any chance of any diplomatic solution, or are we going to see a large-scale military campaign take place in Lebanon?
Yes, there is a chance of diplomatic solution, but the key is in Gaza. As long as this war in Gaza is waged, as you said, Hezbollah would not stop its shelling and bombing of northern Israel, and the clock is ticking because the evacuees are saying that they want to return to their homes, and they expect that next school year, their children would once again attend school. Mm-hmm. So September the 1st is a deadline, and if we don't solve the problem with Hezbollah in the north diplomatically, most probably Minister of Defense Gallant, if he remains in office, and the Chief of Staff will have to mobilize more reservists and to extend the operation against Hezbollah, and it would include a ground invasion.
I mean, again, as a reminder, we're talking about over 80,000 Israelis that have remained displaced from northern border communities with Lebanon. Really no, sense of kind of future as to when they're going to be able to go back to their homes right now.
Yes, actually, the Prime Minister Netanyahu made a comment just the other day that when he was asked about the readiness for getting back to the communities in the north on September 1st, which is the start of the school year, yeah. He said, why is this? This should not be a deadline, that it could be extended a few months into the future, which is a little bit unsustainable. And you cannot just play with the lives of 80,000 people. So I think that at this point, everybody would prefer some political solution. And I think Israel also would be needing to cede some points along the border. But Israel is not willing to do that before there is a total ceasefire and a total understanding that Hezbollah is going to be pushed back north, so they will be not be within, let's say, eye contact on direct right. hitting with their anti-tank missiles.
Yeah, which we've obviously seen those anti-tank missiles have caused so much damage.
The talk is about 10 kilometers to pull right. to pull back Hezbollah up to 10 kilometers from the border.
All right, we're going to come back to this later, but let's turn now to the Gaza Strip where the fighting continues. 22 soldiers have been wounded in the last day, 15 of whom have been injured in the enclave. And today, the IDF has announced the first fatality in the IDF's ground operation in Rafah. That's 19-year-old Sergeant Ira Yair Gispan, who was killed in the fighting yesterday, bringing the IDF's Gaza death toll up to 273. And within the last hour, we actually saw an IDF officer was severely wounded in an encounter with terrorists in northern Gaza, and 2 others were also moderately wounded. Well, Israeli tanks have forged deeper into eastern Rafah, reaching some of the residential districts of the southern border city. More than 1 million displaced Gazans have been sheltering in Rafah. Now the UN says that over 500,000 have been displaced in recent days by escalating Israeli military operations in both southern and northern Gaza. Well, joining us now from southern Israel is our correspondent Nicole Tzedek. Nicole, yesterday we received reports of Israeli tanks moving more deeply into Rafah. What is the situation right now, and where is most of the fighting concentrated in the Gaza Strip at this point?
It's interesting because at this moment, the heavy fighting is really on the southernmost border in Rafah, near the border with Egypt, and on the northernmost border in Jabalia, an area that today the IDF said they've expanded the evacuation zone for Palestinian civilians in that area as well. So this is truly where we're seeing these 2 hot spots of fighting, and unfortunately it is in line with what you just mentioned, the injuries and the deaths we're seeing with IDF troops as well in these 2 major hotspots. So as far as the southern hotspot of Rafah, the IDF says they are continuing with their operations at this time, despite a lot of this international pressure to limit the operations in Rafah. But the IDF continues to say that this is a stronghold and it's necessary for them to continue to go after that. I mean, in their operation so far, they said they've already uncovered more than 10 tunnel networks, and this is just in the eastern part of Rafah. They have yet to expand this operation, really. So still, they're finding these tunnel networks. They're finding finding different Hamas terror infrastructure as well, all throughout the area, and eliminating dozens of Hamas terrorists while operating there as well. And as you mentioned, more than 500,000 Palestinian civilians have evacuated the area so far. Now, if you go to the most northern part of the Gaza Strip as well, Jabalia, I'm not sure if you can hear some of the explosions that are happening here in southern Israel. We're more than 2 miles away from the northern part of the Gaza Strip, yet still this outgoing Israeli artillery is shaking the ground here in southern Israel. We can hear it. And so that's certainly an indication of how much the operations in the northern part of the Gaza Strip have picked up as well. Today, 3 separate times, red sirens and red alerts sounded in the southern city of Sderot. One time, a rocket did hit in a building that no one was inhabiting. It was an empty building, but that projectile was not able to be intercepted by the Iron Dome. The IDF's looking into exactly why, because it wasn't necessarily a large barrage of rockets that were fired, yet one of them was still able to slip through and cause damage in Sderot. And unfortunately, as the IDF is picking up their military activity in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, it is likely that Hamas is going to continue firing their arsenal of weapons and projectiles towards many of these areas in southern Israel that for the past several weeks, several months had no red alerts up until now. Now we're seeing it, it seems, more on a daily basis. Today, 3 times in one day.
All right. Well, Nicole, thanks for joining us. We'll have you back later on air. We're turning now to the United States, where the White House has informed Congress it wants to send more than $1 billion in new weapons to Israel. Quite the twist here, because this comes after the U.S. announced that it had paused a shipment of bombs to Israel over concerns that civilians would be killed if Israel were to use those weapons in densely populated areas of Rafah, where the IDF has recently launched a ground operation. Now, this new weapons package still has to be approved by lawmakers. It has not yet been passed. And joining us from New York is our correspondent Mike Wagenheim with more. So, Mike, first of all, tell us about this new weapons package, how it would be broken down, essentially.
Reportedly, about $700 million worth of ammunition, $500 million in tactical vehicles, another $60 million in mortar rounds, and some other equipment, some other ammunition to round out that $1 billion total. However, it's important to note here, this is not something substantive in that this will suddenly make its way to Israel in the next week or two to help in the battle against Hamas to eliminate their reign in Gaza. This is the very first step in a lengthy process of foreign weapons transfers, the White House notifying Congress of their intention to do so. Now there will be congressional committee meetings open and closed about it. Now there will be a review process in which Congress members can lodge their objections and possibly hold it up for a certain amount of time. There may be some votes on the matter. It's a lengthy process that could take months and years. What this likely, more of anything, is a signal, because now that President Biden has withheld those heavy bombs from Israel because he says he's afraid they'll use them in Rafah in their operation there, this is now some sort of signal to say, hey, that ironclad commitment that I always talk about is still in place. Here's more evidence of it. A billion numbers. It's a large number. It stands out. This is my ongoing commitment to you. In practice, doesn't mean anything in the short term, but in messaging, that's at least the message the White House is trying to send. Even though you're upset about this, hey, we got your back on that.
You know, one of the issues, of course, is how the U.S. is ensuring that the weapons that it sends to the United States are used in a way that it approves of, right? And there's kind of been a lot of discussion as to whether or not Israel has truly been using those weapons according to what the U.S. has directed.
Well, this is kind of where the U.S. has played both sides of the fence, because on one hand, they're expressing concern that there have been violations of international law in terms of a use of certain weapons. But every time push comes to shove, the State Department or another member of the administration will say, hey, we have our concerns, but all in all, there are no violations here of international law, or whatever has happened has since been rectified. And yet, President Biden is withholding those heavy bombs because not of something that definitively happened in the past, but because of a proactive measure, afraid that it will cause more civilian casualties here. So it's still unclear exactly, and I think that's by design. It's still unclear exactly what the Biden admin's stance is here. Has Israel violated international law? Have they not? Are there going to be more, quote unquote, proactive measures and proactive withholding of weapons transfers to happen? I think that's a larger question at this point, and I think that's another reason why the Biden admin kind of spread this message to the press in the reports you're seeing released today on this weapons transfer to say, hey, we're not approving usage of some of these weapons, but by and large, we're dealing with Hezbollah, dealing with Iran, dealing with Syria. We're going to give you what it takes to defend yourselves on those fronts.
All right, Mike, thank you for that breakdown. We're going to turn back to our guests in the studio. Now, definitely mixed messaging from the United States here, to put it nicely. The Secretary of State, Blinken, said that Israel needs a clear and concrete plan for the future of Gaza. He says that, we can't have a vacuum in Gaza that is likely to be filled by chaos. Those are his exact words. And that statement comes after we heard from Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant actually speak in a press conference tonight, saying that there needs to be an alternative governing body to Hamas that needs to be found, but it should not be the military establishment. So that the IDF should not be taking control in the Gaza Strip. What is your take on this?
Okay, first about this, the new weapon package of the 1.3 billion. Biden, when he talked about withholding these heavy bombs because of Rafah, he doesn't want Israel to go into Rafah, made a clear distinction that as far as defensive weapons and munitions, the flow will continue unabated, and I believe this would be tied to the Iron Dome and other issues. So this will continue, and you can understand that there is not a real conflict. I do believe that at some point we will see also a renewed shipment of all the other weapons, including those that were withheld, but without any fanfare. They will not really talk about it, but clearly we will start seeing it coming in, because for the United States, it's very important that Israel will maintain its military edge, its qualitative edge. It's very important not just for the region, for stability in the region, which was broken on the 7th of October to smithereens and has to be now rebuilt, and it can only be rebuilt with a strong Israel, but also the messaging, we're talking messaging to U.S. allies around the world, to Taiwan, to Japan, to South Korea, to NATO allies, that the United States stands by its allies, certainly at a time of war. And as to what Blinken said, it's from day one. They were talking about the day after, and we all know that any military campaign cannot be successful without the right political end. And this is told by, as you mentioned, by Minister of Defense Gallant. The IDF is talking about it. The Americans are talking about it. And the cabinet, the war cabinet, is talking about it. The only one who actually shies away from saying what will be the day after is the Prime Minister. And here again, the suspicion here is in Washington as well as in Jerusalem that this is because of political interests.
Well, we saw Netanyahu actually respond to Gallant, the defense minister, saying that as long as Hamas remains, nobody else will run Gaza, certainly not the Palestinian Authority. Again, he didn't say that it's Israel necessarily that's going to be, running business. But again, he's clearly trying to remain vague as to what the future is going to be, because there's a lot of people within his own coalition that he needs to please at this point for what you could say the maintaining his power at this point.
He's not trying to remain vague. He's clear as a daylight. What he says, what Netanyahu said in response to Gallant's comments earlier, it's a catch-22 situation. Because Netanyahu says, as long as Hamas is in Gaza, we would not talk about the day after and who would replace Hamas. Just a second. But if you don't talk about it, and if you don't form a coalition to remove Hamas, then you would not remove Hamas, and Hamas would stay in power. And this is the catch-22 of Netanyahu. Now, Netanyahu it's clear that he doesn't want to talk about it, because the moment he will start talking about it, not even taking decisions, that would be the end of his coalition. That's what his right-wing
Which is what
ministers...
I was getting to, the political interests that are kind of
Well,
damaging
it's
their path
interlinked.
forward. But we have to turn right now to Egypt, unfortunately. We will continue this conversation, I promise. Tensions are simmering right now as well between Israel and Egypt. Senior Israeli officials fear that Egypt may decide to stop mediating the hostage release and ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas following threats by Egypt to downgrade diplomatic ties. Well, this comes in response to the IDF's decision to launch a ground operation in Rafah and take over control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. Important to note that the Rafah crossing is on the border between Egypt and southern Gaza, and it's been a vital route for aid going into the coastal enclave. But now, Israel and Egypt are accusing each other of hindering the aid flow into Gaza since it's currently shut down. Israel says that it is up to Egypt to reopen the crossing and allow humanitarian relief into the Strip. But Cairo claims that Israel is just trying to shift the blame for the blockage of aid deliveries. Now, to make matters worse, Cairo has also announced that it will be joining South Africa's genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, which has deeply angered the Israeli government. And joining us now is Haysam Hassanin, an adjunct fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So my first question for you, is it actually within Egypt's interest to downgrade ties with Israel, or are these empty threats? What is Egypt's red line here?
First of all, thanks for having me, Natasha. Regarding your question, Egypt will continue its mediation role between Hamas and Israel. There is no question about that. It's an important aspect of Egyptian foreign policy in the region, and its involvement in the Palestinian arena in general benefited the country greatly for years with Washington, Western capitals, and even regional power. And the past decade alone, Cairo was not comfortable with the Qatari and the Turkish involvement in the Palestinian arena in general through their involvement with the Islamist proxy Hamas. Now, Hamas is being weakened by a way or another by Israel. So this means more Egyptian leverage inside Gaza if the coordination happens in the right way between Jerusalem and Cairo. Egypt has two red lines currently. One, if a Rafah offense by Israel pushes displaced Gazans to Sinai. To say the least, Cairo doesn't want to do anything with Palestinian refugees because some Hamas members could be sneaking among them into Egyptian territories and cause some trouble, or even the way it will look in front of its public by having Palestinian in its sovereign territory. Two, messing up with its, let's say, dignity as a state, meaning if the IDF control of the Rafah crossing will reveal more details about corrupt Egyptian dealings with Hamas in the past to smuggle weapons and other issues, this is likely to be a huge embarrassment for Cairo in the international arena, and Egypt would like to avoid that.
It is widely known that Hamas uses tunnels under the Rafah crossing to transport weapons and goods, even bodies like its fighters. And of course, there's a fear that potentially Israeli hostages could be transported underneath the Rafah crossing. Can Egypt really expect Israel not to take action on this issue?
The thing is, in Egypt, the crossing is seen as a profitable business by some elements of the regime. So an Israeli control of it, regardless the purpose, is frowned upon because they either losing money or some tribal leaders in Sinai are not satisfied with that alongside the former officials who got rich in the past decades because of the tunnel business. So by having Israel on this side of the border stops all the profits, and I don't think they care much about hostages or Israeli interests as much as they care about what they have been doing for the past 2 decades.
Now, if Cairo were to pull out as a mediator in the ongoing hostage release and ceasefire negotiations, is there an adequate replacement? Because Qatar is also distancing itself from mediating as well, it seems.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I don't think Egypt will pull out. It's a golden opportunity for the Sisi regime to be relevant in the current Middle East politics. If you think about it, before October 7th, the regime was struggling to play a role in key regional conflicts since everything was centered around Iran and its proxies, or the rich Gulf states and the potentials they could fulfill in the region. Plus, domestically, Sisi was struggling as well with his own constituents as well, because people were frustrated and bored, and they are wondering, after 10 years, what we offer them socioeconomically. So now the regime can brag about being the center of attention in the whole world. As you can see, Cairo is receiving phone calls every day from world leaders. International press is everywhere in the country. So this is a huge card for the regime to market itself regionally and domestically.
Now, the decision to join South Africa and Turkey against Israel in the genocide campaign at the International Court of Justice has widely been seen as a stab in the back to the state of Israel. What is the intention of doing this? What's the messaging here?
Basically, Cairo is sending few messages to Israel. One, it disapproves the Rafah offense, and this is one of the escalatory steps they decided to pursue. Also, it's a primitive diplomatic card against Israel, just in case Israel decides to reveal more information on the shady corruption business by the security officials with Hamas. Plus, saving face in the Arab world. The Egyptian regime is widely unpopular in general because the past decade what did with the Muslim Brotherhood by a way or another, and nowadays because they refuse to help displaced Palestinians. Videos are being circulated on social media of Egyptian border officers were getting into a fight with some Palestinians on the borders, and some even accuse the regime of cooperating with Israel in its war against Hamas. So taking side of South Africa is a way for the Egyptian regime to debunk these allegations.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. That is it for now. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but don't go anywhere. We will be back shortly with our continued rolling coverage of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war here on I-24 News. I'm Natasha Kirchuk. Stick with us. We have a lot coming up. We're going to be discussing Iraq, Jordan, a foiled Iranian plan to arm opponents of the Jordanian government. You're not going to want to miss this. We'll see you soon.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
And we're back on I-24 News. I'm Natasha Kirchik, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is hinting that he will not support the current draft law suggested by Prime Minister Netanyahu. This latest proposal, suggested by Netanyahu earlier today, would lower the age of deferment for yeshiva students, a bill that was first proposed by then Defense Minister Benny Gantz back in 2022. Take a look at this report.
As if Israel's war in Gaza isn't enough, the Israeli government is now put to a new test. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to advance a contentious ultra-Orthodox exemption bill in an effort to keep the political peace and his coalition in place. The Prime Minister's office released a statement declaring that the Israeli parliament would advance the bill in order to help bridge the gaps, also noting that the draft law had passed the first reading in 2022. Under the Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett coalition government. The proposed bill would lower the exemption age for compulsory military service for ultra-Orthodox men studying Torah from 26 to 21. Ultra-Orthodox men can avoid the compulsory military service secular Israelis have to do by enlisting in yeshivas to study. Critics say many remain studying longer than they usually would in order to avoid being drafted. The bill had originally been drafted under then Defense Minister Benny Gantz with the plan to help integrate ultra-Orthodox into the workforce. But Gantz, a Netanyahu rival who sits in his war cabinet, warned against the passing of the draft under the pretense that this is Netanyahu's latest political maneuver. Gantz specified that the law as it was presented in 2022 wasn't satisfactory then and is not relevant now in a post-October 7 reality. Siding with Benny Gantz, the head of the opposition Israel Beitenu party, Avigdor Lieberman, also stated that today's realities had changed entirely and that the situation requires a mandatory conscription law for everyone. Ultra-Orthodox conscription has remained an unresolved issue since the beginning of the state, with various governments trying to placate both religious parties and secular ones. When the government announced the second reading of the draft, the ultra-Orthodox parties remained uncharacteristically quiet, sparking conspiracy theories that Netanyahu had coordinated the move with them. According to those same theories, Netanyahu had agreed to this draft, knowing full well war cabinet ministers Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot would not accept it, therefore bringing the issue to a deadlock once again.
Yossi, what's your take on this?
It's part of the political game, part of Netanyahu's efforts to remain in power and to delay, to use delaying tactics and to stall time and nothing else. And as long as as long as he has 64 solid seats glued in cement in the parliament, and as long as there is a war, the protest would not turn against Netanyahu, as we saw before the war. And therefore, that's Netanyahu's game. The Orthodox don't want to be called to service. The rabbis oppose it, and there is no rabbinical authority among the new generation of rabbis, and they control the politicians, and the politicians would not dare going out against the rabbis. Therefore, the Orthodox numbers will pile up and up and up of those who refuse to serve in the military, and the burden is falling on the rest of the Israeli population. I remember Netanyahu, I was in a briefing with him in which he drew how the Israeli economy is built, that a fat guy is sitting on the shoulders of a slim guy. In other words, that a small minority of the Israeli populace is feeding, is productive, and is providing the means for the Israeli economy. And the rest are the Orthodox who don't, and other elements of, like Israeli Arabs as well, which don't serve in the military. Now Netanyahu is reversed that drawing on, drawing on the wall, which I saw, and he is now supporting his Orthodox partners because he wants to stay in power.
Well, I would say that invoking this 2.5 years old legislation about the conscription law may be too little and too late, because it referred to the time before the war. And if you look at the tables of how many Orthodox would join the military according to the bill, it's, again, too little, talking about a few hundreds every year. Now, the war has changed everything, because now the military is missing about 6,000 soldiers a year, just too short. And this is why what Gantz and Eisenkron are saying is true, and also the opposition, that you cannot bring this old legislation because it's irrelevant anymore. This is why you have to have a whole new game, and the Orthodox will have to just pull their weight.
If I may add to it.
Quickly.
Yeah. It's another, not just a test, it's another crisis. Because Gallant said today that he would not sign this bill. He wouldn't, and he has to do it. Now, the clock is ticking because the Supreme Court has to make a decision. The Supreme Court has delayed its decisions for years and years and years under governmental pretext that they are going to solve the problem. So I think this time the Supreme Court would decide enough is enough. And then we have a legal crisis because the government may not obey the law.
All right. Well, this is really an open-ended question at this point. We're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. Right now, we're going to turn to the east. Jordan has foiled a suspected Iranian-led plot to smuggle weapons into the kingdom as part of a plan to help opponents of the monarchy carry out acts of sabotage. Now, the weapons were reportedly sent by Iranian-backed militias in Syria to a cell of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, which has links to the military wing of Hamas, the Palestinian terror group. Now, the arms were seized after members of the cell, who happen to be Jordanians of Palestinian descent, were arrested in late March. And joining us now is foreign policy expert Dr. Walid Fares. This plot sheds a light on the influence that Iran is attempting to have in Jordan. Is this a unique incident, or is this something that Jordan has been struggling with for quite some time?
It's both. On the one hand, there is a long history of Iran regime-led actions, networking, work, including from within the Syria Assad regime in the past, to undermine the Hashemite kingdom, the Hashemite government, meaning the king and his supporters, number one. Number two, obviously, King Hussein was the first one who tried to contain this. He's the one who authored this slogan in the Arab world that Iran, meaning the Islamic regime, is trying to establish a Shia crescent. What he meant, obviously, are the supporters of these militias. So it's an old story. What is new about it is that since October, since the terrible attack on Israel in the Negev, we see that Tehran is actually taking this seriously. And the other factor, now we can see that the Islamic Republic and the Ikhwan and the Muslim Brotherhood, one Sunni, one Shia, have actually came together, converge on one target, which is to weaken and eventually, if they can, topple or half topple the government of Jordan.
Now, Iran vowed to retaliate against Jordan for its role in defending Israel during the Iranian attack against Israel back in April. Is this that retaliation, or is it just part of an ongoing Iranian plot to influence Jordanian power?
Again, I must say it's both. There is a long-standing strategy by the Iranian regime. And now, as I said, and that's very important, they've merged those efforts with the Ikhwan and whomever supports the Ikhwan in the region. It's really global. What they see in Jordan is also a sort of, that's what they say on social media, an American or Western aircraft carrier. We know that many of our special forces are deployed in Jordan. Jordan serves, very silently though, as the backer of the presence of U.S. forces, though small, but drone force, so on and so forth, operating in eastern Syria and northern Iraq. So if you cut off or if you destabilize Jordan, it's not just Jordan that will feel the heat. It's not just Israel that will definitely feel the heat, but it's U.S. forces and allied forces in eastern Syria and northern Iraq. So on the one hand, it is a long project that they have done, but certainly because of Jordan showed when the wave of missiles was heading towards Israel, they just did we all know what they've done. And that is something, is a casus belli with Tehran.
Now, we're seeing the Eager Lion military drill take place right now in Jordan. That's where we're seeing a coalition of anti-Iranian nations come together to prepare for war. After the Iranian attack on Israel, would you say that it's pushed Israel closer with its Arab neighbors?
Oh, definitely. Actually, this was happening. I was part of the early talks before the Abraham Accord. I'm talking about 1917 when President Trump went to Riyadh to help in the launching of the Arab coalition at the time. It was coming close, meaning there were a lot of decision makers in the region, including in Jordan. But as we know, it's always secretive because of the retaliation. In Saudi Arabia, we know it very well with MBS. Maybe UAE is the only one that goes about it very publicly. So the culture of coming together, forming a regional bloc, to stop the expansion of the regime in Iran, to also go against the jihadists and Hamas and obviously the Muslim Brotherhood. That was happening. What delayed it now is the change of policy in Washington since the withdrawal from Afghanistan and since the return to the Iran deal. And we see now some sort of tension, as we all know, not just between the Biden administration and the Israeli government, but between the administration and a huge majority in Congress that has also Democrats. So yes, at this point in time, there needs to be a change of policy in Washington to revigorate this Arab closeness, friendship with the Israelis.
Now, over 70% of Jordan is made up of citizens of Palestinian descent, yet Jordanian leadership continues to align with the United States and Israel diplomatically. Is there anything that could change that? And is Iran really the only binding factor here in your eyes?
It's a great question. I mean, if you go back to history quickly, in 1970, that was the equation. The PLO at the time, which was based in Jordan, actually took some support from Jordanians who are from Palestinian descent. But that's the old history. What is happening now is not really the ethnic group in Jordan, the Arab from Palestinian descent who are in conflict with the Hashemites. The younger generations are different. They feel Jordanians. They're happy that they are Jordanians, and they're happy with the policy. But those who are jihadists, Islamists, Salafists, who are basically the old Hizb al-Amal Islami, the Islamic party, which is, in fact, connected to Hamas. So the Islamist movement that is inside Jordan's communities that are originally from Palestinian descent that are now mobilizing against the king. But I can tell you one thing, we should be happy that the middle class in Jordan, despite all what we see on TV, they don't want war, they don't want destabilization, they don't want to see the Iranian regime or the Ikhwan in power in Amman.
All right, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. We're going to turn now to our guests in the studio. Yossi, I see that you had something you wanted to respond to there.
I completely agree with my colleague stating how Iran is trying to destabilize the region.
Right.
But the end game of Iran is not just simply to destabilize Jordan by trying to thwart the Jordanian regime. Iran has a very, very clear goal. It wants to circle Israel with the ring of fire. Israel is already circled by Hamas in the south, by Hezbollah in the north. In the east, we have Iraq, which is controlled by, most of it is controlled by pro-Iranian Shiite elements. And they know once they topple the Hashemite regime, Iran will be in full control of the Middle East, and Israel would be completely isolated with our back to the sea. Mm-hmm. Now, this is one of the reasons, but it's not the only reasons, that Jordan has been cooperating with Israel for many, many years, right. Maybe 6 decades. The first secret meeting between an Israeli leader and the Jordanian ruler, King Hussein, Abdallah's father, took place already in London in Paris in 63 and London 65 with Israeli leaders. That was secret. In 1994, the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan was signed. The secret relations surfaced, became open, but the intelligence and the military cooperation between two sides is going all the time. And Jordan also knows that Israel is a pillar which would defend Jordan from Iranian incursion.
Natasha, Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, told all his advisors that the vulnerable border of Israel is with Jordan. That actually the hopeful demise in his eyes of Israel would be through the Jordan border. This is why he's making all the efforts to take over Jordan. This is quite obvious, because by taking over Jordan, then he can control the Hamas cells in the West Bank, and of course he has the backing, of Iraq, Syria, and as Yossi said, a ring of fire. Also, it's very important to note that the real mission of these radical, crazy extremists in Tehran is actually to control the entire region and even beyond. They want to subject all the countries around it, all the Sunni countries around it. Jewish state, of course, is out of the picture, according to their vision, to subject them to the Iranian hegemonious power. And how do they do that? Israel is the one interrupting them. Israel is the one that really is the dam against Iranian, expansion in the region. And this is why they also, and this is a very, very important point, this is also why they fuel this war with Hamas through the Hezbollah and the Houthis and others, because they want to divert attention from their nuclear program. And Grossi, the head of the IAEA, said that actually they have lost control of what's happening with the nuclear program of Iran. And this is something that we should not actually drop the ball, because this is the most dangerous thing, not just to Israel, all the region, and also to the United States. And here, I think we should clearly, even though everything is now diverted by the short-term fire in Gaza, Hezbollah, Houthis, but the most dangerous thing is the Iranians' nuclear ambitions and program, which has to stop, and snap-up sanctions could easily be just activated.
Yeah,
I
completely agree.
I unfortunately just have to move on to Iraq, but this is related, and hopefully we're going to have you back to actually speak on this as well. The IDF says that it's shot down 2 drones headed into Israeli territory from Iraq within the last 24 hours. This comes after a statement from the Iran-backed terror group Islamic Resistance in Iraq, claiming to have launched 2 drones at Eilat specifically. Now, meanwhile, the Islamic State is suspected of killing several Iraqi soldiers on Monday following what appears to be increased ISIS activity in Iraq. Here's what one of the family members of the victims had to say.
We condemn this terrorist act that occurred. No one is deterring these ISIS members. The government is not deterring them, and demands to the government to do so go unanswered. They keep coming back to kill us. What fault is it of the victims? No one besides Allah helps them.
Well, U.S.-backed Iraqi forces defeated ISIS territorially in 2017, but this resurgence is worrying, and Iraqi operations against the Islamic State are ongoing. Well, joining us now is Intifad Kanbar, the former spokesperson of the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Intifad, what is going on here? I mean, how worried should Iraq be about an Islamic State resurgence?
Well, the focus is shifting. The focus was fighting ISIS in part of coalition led by the United States in Iraq, with U.S. troops and U.S. Air Force helped tremendously to defeat ISIS. However, now with the Shia militias, the proxies of Iran, I listened to the conversation of gentlemen in your studio, the Iran proxy war, and part of this Iran proxy war is in Iraq. Iraq basically becoming a strategic depth for animosity against Israel, backing up Hezbollah, backing up the militias in Syria, and a land bridge for weapons and fighters coming through Iraq to Lebanon and Syria and elsewhere. Not to mention, there are Hamas training and visitations and coordinations with Iraq. What's more troubling, those militias who are attacking Israel are funded overtly in a line budget in the Iraqi budget, in the Iraqi state budget. And the United States is not making any move about it. In fact, the United States invited the Prime Minister of Iraq to Washington mid of April, while the Iraqi government, as I said, funding Shia militias. Four of these militias sanctioned by U.S. Treasury are funded more than $3 billion directly from the Iraqi oil revenue.
There are currently around 2,500 U.S. military personnel in Iraq as part of the anti-ISIS coalition, but the Iraqi government seeks the withdrawal of these American forces from the country. And this also comes amid warming relations with China and Iran. I mean, China won a major deal for gas exploration in Iraq, and we saw high-level diplomatic meetings as well between Iraqi, Kurdish, and Iranian leaders. Could we see an Iraqi alliance pivot to the east?
What's happening now, basically, most of U.S. companies like Shell exiting Iraq, replaced by Chinese and Russian companies, which is part of the Iran axis. The only American and British companies now are working in northern Iraq and Kurdistan Iraq. And to be honest with you, there is no more allies for the United States in Iraq except for the Kurds. That's why the Kurds has been attacked, along with Israel and the rest of the region, by those militias. Several attacks, devastating attacks. Some came directly from Iran by Scud missiles, and some come from the militias, even against their gas fields, to continue buying the gas from Iran. But it's also, we go back to the U.S. policy, which is allowing Iraq to pay billions of dollars for gas from Iran, while the militias attacking Kurdistan gas and depriving Iraq of its own gas. So you see, this is this vicious circle of bad U.S. policy. And the key word here is deterrence, or lack of deterrence. Lack of U.S. deterrence is encouraging Iran to use Iraq and use the rest of the region militias as a proxy war.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Really kind of fascinating to hear your input on this. Obviously, we could go on with this conversation for hours at this point. We've been talking about all the regional threats facing Israel specifically. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us, our guests in studio, Sibelman, and former ambassador to the U.S., Dani Ayalon. We're turning now to a story in India. I know we're leaving the Middle East. The country is halfway through voting in its general election. We're talking about almost 1 billion people who are able to vote during the 44-day-long process, with the polls closing on the 1st of June. So you're probably thinking, how is the country able to organize such a massive voting process? Well, our Shaya Kir went to Goa, India to find out more. Take a look.
Organizing parliamentary elections in India is a very complicated operation.
We have, as you know, around close to 970 million voters, which is, the more than the combined electorates of many countries put together. And this voting will take place at around 10.1 million polling stations.
Preparations got underway long in advance.
Election management is a tardy exercise, and we started a year back from the starting of month of April.
Voting began on April the 19th and will end only on June the 4th. Getting such a huge mass of people to the polling station has to be well organized from the most basic level. From the moment you land in Delhi, you're confronted by billboards and swamped on social media with calls for citizens to register on the app and to come and vote. When voters do get to the polling booth, they cast their vote using a machine called an EVM. It's useful, given the large number of illiterate voters in the subcontinent. Next to every candidate on the ballot, there's also a symbol.
Basically, it's the largest democracy in India. So I think this election will make government strong.
Largest population, to administer and manage. So many countries are copying our system.
In Goa, the smallest state in India, with only around 1.2 million eligible voters, voting day is considered a festival. There are themes to increase social awareness on topics important to society. A green polling station aims to increase awareness of global warming, or some polling stations are colored pink and run only by women to bring home the importance of female empowerment.
Earlier, women were not given any importance here, but now women has equal role with the men.
It's good for India, and it's giving a lot of chance and the way for the women.
In 2024, India will have the fastest growing economy among the G20 nations. Polls suggest this would earn Prime Minister Modi his third term, heading the BJP party.
How you like Modi? Modi is not corruption. Modi is very clean.
Very clean.
Not corrupted? No corrupt.
If he succeeds, he will be the first Prime Minister to do so since Nehru, one of India's founding fathers. His main rival, ironically, is Nehru's great-grandson, Rahul Gandhi, the head of the Indian National Congress Party. The economy's successful growth in recent years seems to be the main issue on voters' minds.
I think it's growing. It's growing very fast.
India is growing. Next 5 years, it will do very good because in terms of infrastructure and everything, India is doing very well, to be very frank.
We want a candidate who will work for us, who will do the development for my state as well as for my country.
But not only. Another big issue is the religious polarization between Hindus and the Muslim minority, who make up 14% of the population and constitute the second largest religion in India.
Religion is a big barrier, caste system is a big barrier. It's gone, but still it's a lot of things happening. That should change. Yeah. If that changes, India is going to be number one.
On June the 6th, the result will be known, and whoever wins will face the enormous challenge of keeping India on the path it is currently navigating.
That's it from the I-24 News Desk. I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon. Don't go anywhere.
Life.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24 únicamente en I-24 News.
Welcome to this special edition on I-24 News. I'm Kalev Ben David. It is day 222 of Israel at war, and a day of fierce fighting between IDF forces and Hamas terrorists in Gaza, in both Jabalia in the northern half of the Strip and Rafah at its southernmost point. The Army today announcing the first fatality in the Rafah fighting, 19-year-old Sergeant Ira Yair Gispan, bringing the number of combat deaths in Gaza to 269. But the focus of Israel's political leadership today seemed to be on the day after of a post-Hamas Gaza. In a dramatic statement this evening, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant broke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that he will not agree to any post-Hamas Israeli rule of Gaza, and the government must begin planning now for the post-Hamas governance of Gaza under Palestinian rule. Netanyahu responded shortly afterwards with a statement appearing to refute Gallant's concerns. Here's some of both of those comments.
The security establishment and the IDF are responsible for destroying Hamas and ensuring the maintenance of full military freedom of action in Gaza. The capacity to do so depends on the creation of alternative governance in Gaza, and all parts of the government of Israel have to do this. The way this is implemented will influence Israel's security situation for decades to come. I call on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to make a decision and declare that Israel will not exercise civilian rule in the Gaza Strip, because no Israeli military administration will be established in Gaza, and that an alternative government to Hamas in the Gaza Strip will be advanced immediately.
I am not ready to replace Hamastan with Fatahstan. After the terrible massacre of October the 7th, I promised to finish off Hamas. The soldiers of the IDF and the security services are fighting for this. As long as Hamas remains in place, there is no other authority willing to take over the civil administration of Gaza, and certainly not the Palestinian Authority. 80% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria support the terrible massacre of October the 7th.
All right. Well, for just an update on what's happening down south, let's go to Nicole Tzedek, who is on the Israel-Gaza border. Nicole, a day of fierce fighting there in Gaza, just shortly by you, and sirens, still sirens ringing out, and rocket attacks there on that Gaza border area where you're standing.
Right where I'm standing, Kalev, 3 times today here in Sderot, sirens sounded throughout the day, with multiple projectiles launched from the northern part of the Gaza Strip. One of them able to slip past the air defense system and hit an unoccupied building here in Sderot. So no one was injured, but still, the IDF is investigating why the Iron Dome was not able to intercept that projectile, especially because we're not seeing necessarily large barrages of rockets fired from northern Gaza, but still several rockets fired, and one of them able to make a hit, while Sderot is currently fully occupied. There's people all out in the streets. Even here on the hill next to me, there's people standing and looking at the action that is happening not far in the distance, because there is quite a bit of activity happening in this northern part of the Gaza Strip. And unfortunately, as the IDF does push forward with their activity, specifically in Jabalia earlier today, increasing the evacuation zone in more areas in Jabalia, urging residents to evacuate west of Gaza City. And as that does happen, it's likely that more and more projectiles are going to be launched as Hamas continues to fire their projectiles towards some of these southern Israeli towns. Now, that's what we're seeing in the northern part, but it's interesting because the two hot spots of fighting really are on the most northern part of the Gaza Strip and the most southern part of the Gaza Strip. Rafah, that is where we're also seeing lots of this activity. The IDF says earlier today one projectile was launched towards Kerem Shalom once again, but it did fall in an open area, and so no sirens were actually sounded in any of the towns in the area, just on the Homefront Command app if anyone was in those open areas, but no one was said to be damaged. So we are seeing, as the IDF is moving forward with these military operations, Hamas, any individuals or terror squads that are left, they're using the last weaponry that they still have stockpiled to still fire towards these southern Israeli towns.
All right. Nicole Tzedek there on the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that. With us in studio, we have Yaki Dayan, the former Israeli consul to Los Angeles, and Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs and analyst at the Miriam Institute and for the Jewish News Syndicate and Alma Center. And Yaki, the fighting in Gaza, which we expect, but maybe even more remarkable today, is the fighting within the government over the day after Defense Minister Gallant, not for the first time, going against Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he's done in the past on the judicial reform, but they are taking issue and taking, in a way, direct aim at the Prime Minister over this question of whether Israel has to now start planning for the day after in Gaza.
Yes, as you defined it correctly, it was a very dramatic day. I mean, you see people that are sitting in the war cabinet deciding about the future of the Jewish state, and all of them argue whether it's the Minister of Defense or the Prime Minister on the day after. And we clearly heard the Minister of Defense saying that there is no clear vision for the day after, and he doesn't want to see the Israelis ruling Gaza on the day after. And on the political side, on the draft law that is going to be presented in the Knesset.
Right, we'll talk a little about that.
But still, you see that on all the fronts there are bitter discussions and arguments in the war cabinet, and this war cabinet has to take decisions on today on the tactical issues, on the strategic issues, and you ask yourself, where is the confidence on those leaders to lead Israel on the day after, whether there are such arguments publicly, outside, not inside the cabinet, but outside the cabinet.
Right, and you wonder if Netanyahu, we've seen him once before fire Yoav Gallant and then backtrack.
I think he wouldn't dare, Caleb, because
in the middle of a war.
He wouldn't dare because, I mean, he saw what happened in the first time. He might lose guns as well, and more than that, he might lose the Americans. And having done all that, that's too much for Netanyahu to risk.
Right, but besides the sort of larger, I guess, political strategic issue, there is a question to be asked, Yaakov, if whether what we see this fighting in Jabalia, we just heard Nicole describe it, is whether this reemergence of Hamas in northern Gaza is connected with Israel's, if you want to call it a failure so far, to create a post-Hamas governance, even in the parts of Gaza that it has conquered.
So I think there are two aspects to this question. First of all, the military is going to keep going back into Gaza, not for months, for years. And I think it's important for the public to have that expectation adjusted. The military terrorist challenge posed by Hamas is going to require years of targeted IDF operations, just like we see 20 years after Operation Defensive Shield in the West Bank. That's what the IDF is going to have to do and more in Gaza in order to prevent Hamas from resurging. So when people ask why is it going back into Jabalia, guess what? It's going to go back into Jabalia many, many more times. But there is no question that the failure of Israel to set up a political substitute to Hamas has helped Hamas resurge. There's no question in my mind about that. And regarding the debate between Gallant and the Prime Minister, I think in a way both of them are wrong because I don't understand how we can talk about a local Palestinian substitute to Hamas that would survive under these conditions or even under similar conditions. I think Hamas,
which is Gallant's point,
Yeah, I think Hamas itself, not by itself. I think with Arab countries and with support of
no amount of, in my opinion, Arab countries can stop Hamas gunmen from going in and assassinating. At this time, I'm not talking about the future.
I understand.
And therefore, I don't see any alternative but to set up an IDF civil administration in the Gaza Strip. I think it should have been done months ago, and that would have put a nail in the coffin of the Hamas aspirations for a political regime when they see Israel take over that for a future handoff to a local Gazan autonomy.
Just one point, quick point. I mean, there is a difference between continuation on the military side fighting Hamas and the administrative side fighting Hamas. Because once there is a vacuum, when the Israeli defense forces are going out, then the Hamas is taking control and renewing their administrative control. This is something that should be prevented. On the military side, yes, you should go on and on and on. This is an ongoing fight. But on the administrative level, this is a problem. And the fact that Israel doesn't have any kind of a solution for the day after maintains the Hamas force on the administrative level.
We'll look at this issue a little more on. But as Israel broadens its offensive into that last Hamas stronghold in Gaza, Rafah, it is coming under increasing international pressure to limit or halt its operations there. More on that in the latest Israeli response in this report from our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini.
On the ground in Rafah, Gaza, fighting between Hamas and IDF soldiers is intensifying, with international pressure to halt the violence growing louder. A video released Tuesday by the terror organization said to show its fighters attacking Israeli tanks near the city of Rafah. And Israel announcing a soldier killed in combat, Israel's first fatality in the military push into the South Gazan city. According to the IDF, 4 of 6 remaining Hamas battalions are located in Rafah, and several Hamas leaders are believed to be hiding in the city, keeping many of the Israeli hostages. For now, Israel is conducting what it calls a limited and targeted operation in the outskirts of Rafah, insisting it must enter the city despite warnings from the international community not to. With at least 1 million civilians sheltering in and around Rafah, lack of infrastructure and access to humanitarian aid is a major concern.
With regard to Gaza, one of the deep concerns that we have is the impact of this limited operation that we've seen to date in Rafah on the ability to provide humanitarian assistance, because the 2 main points of access in the south, Rafah itself and Kerem Shalom, have been affected by the resulting conflict in the south.
As Israel gears up to expand its military operation in Rafah, the IDF is warning Palestinians in the area to flee to other zones, which the UN says are not safe or fully functioning. Around 500,000 Palestinians are believed to have fled the city. The European Union released a statement urging Israel to end its military operation in Rafah immediately, adding that, quote, should Israel continue, it would inevitably put a heavy strain on the EU's relationship with Israel. The IDF released a video showing armed men in a UN compound in Rafah and called the organization to investigate. The US continues to insist that Israel must present a plan for what will happen on the ground after the war.
We've been very clear that when it comes to the future of Gaza, we do not support and will not support an Israeli reoccupation. We also, of course, do not support Hamas governance in Gaza. We know and have seen where that's led all too many times for the people of Gaza and for Israel. And we also can't have anarchy and a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos. That only underscores the imperative of having a clear, concrete plan for the day after the conflict in Gaza, in terms of governance, in terms of security, in terms of rebuilding Gaza for its people.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding with a clear message.
Until it becomes clear that Hamas doesn't rule Gaza militarily, no actor will be ready to accept upon himself civil rule in Gaza for fear of his own safety.
The Prime Minister added that any discussions of the day after are meaningless until Hamas is defeated.
Well, as you heard, of course, the pressure to start also that Minister Gallant was speaking about was, to some degree, a response to the pressure being put by the United States. For more on the U.S. Role here, let's go to Mike Wagenheim, our senior U.S. correspondent in New York. Mike, a lot going on in Washington, but I do want to relate to this comment. We've heard a dramatic statement by Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, calling on Prime Minister Netanyahu to begin earnest discussions of planning for a day after in Gaza. You have to imagine, to some degree, that's in response to that increasing pressure we're seeing from the Biden administration, from the U.S. to get that process going.
Yeah, those criticisms have been coming for months now. It seems every time an American official, whether it be Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken or wherever it makes its way to Jerusalem or to the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, keeps bringing this up. What is the plan? What is the plan? This predates Rafah. This is going months ago. We've got to have a plan for the day after. We've got to have a plan for governance for Gaza, for reconstruction for Gaza. What is your idea, Israeli guy? And the frustration from Washington has been palpable that they've never, it's not just a clearly defined answer, it's been no answer at all, essentially.
Not that Israel will take over, not that it will be turned over. There's been a lot of no's along the way, and rightfully so, I think, from Israel's standpoint, that they don't want to see this entity or that entity run Gaza post-Hamas. But to have no answer at all has been incredibly frustrating to the U.S.-Israeli relationship, has been detrimental, I think, to a lot of the periphery talks on other issues, because if you don't have a plan for this, well, why are we investing in everything that leads up to this? Why are we sending weapons? Why are we giving support when it could all fall apart the day after if there's no plan in place, or at least not an idea of what you want to do? So I think Yoav Gallant has been feeling the pressure on that as well for months. What pushed him over the edge today, not quite clear, but it's obvious the pressure has been building for quite some time.
All right, and let's talk about the issue of U.S. aid to Israel. It seems like every day there's a new headline now. Talk about a new $1 billion aid package, and it's just remarkable the way how aid to Israel, once just almost a consensus bipartisan issue, now has become in so many ways a hot-button topic in Washington.
Yeah, when you start reading more about election season and Israel, it's never a good thing. When you start reading about Republicans versus Democrats on Israel, it's never a good thing. When the president comes right out and says, I'm going to veto a bill related to Israel, not a positive development whatsoever. I think the message that Joe Biden and his administration intended to send today with this essential leak of information of a $1 billion possible weapons transfer to Israel is that despite everything that's happened in the last couple of weeks with the withholding of the heavy bombs, we still have that quote-unquote, you hear it ad nauseum, ironclad commitment to Israel's security and safety. So this is the Biden admin's way of saying we still have your back, even though we disagree on many fairly important issues here. The flip side of that is, in effect, this announcement today, or this leak today, has no bearing on the short term whatsoever in terms of practical on-the-ground implications. It's the very first step, in fact, in a long process of a weapons package transfer, just notifying Congress. It now will sit in front of probably several committees, discussions, review processes, not only by Congress, the State Department and the Pentagon will be involved as well. It will be, if it's ever approved at all, it will be a long, long way from actually making its way onto the ground in Israel here. So this was messaging today rather than an actual, practical implication in the short term for Israel's defense.
All right, Mike Wagenheim there in New York. Mike, thank you for that. Now, U.S. aid, military aid to Israel may have less impact on the fighting in Gaza than on a possible expansion of fighting in the north of Israel. And it has been a day of intense cross-border fire in the country's north. Hezbollah launching dozens of rockets at Israeli territory after an IDF airstrike overnight killed one of the Shiite militia's top field commanders, Hussein Maki. Well, our Balir Sladin is in northern Israel. And Balir, even now, we're seeing reports of alerts fairly still in northern Israel, but quite on the sort of southern edge of it, even a little beyond where we seem Hezbollah has been firing over the past 7 months.
Yes, exactly. We're talking about the lower Galil. Now, this is an area, the siren, by the way, went off in Kfar Nahar Yarden, which is east of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee. This is the first time since the October 8th, when the hostilities started, we hear a siren in that area. It's not clear what happened exactly, but what we know for sure is one interceptor that went from Safad, which is like more north, of course, and we're talking about the Patriot air defense system, where it's not clear whether it hit the target, which is apparently a UAV that was fired from southern Lebanon, or not. What is for sure is that there was actually an explosion heard. It's not clear whether this explosion is because of the interceptor that was successful, or we're talking about an explosive drone that actually hit its target right there east of Tiberias. I know, and I'm from that area. There is actually military sites in that area. This could be actually the target of Hezbollah, and if that's the case, then we're talking about a very unusual attack from Hezbollah. Of course, this will lead to an increase in the hostilities, and maybe we'll see an attack from the Israeli Air Force deep inside Lebanon, just like we've seen in previous incidents like this, maybe in Baalbek, just like it happened over and over again over the past few months. And this is, of course, not the only incident today. We're talking about the dozens of rockets that hit Mount Meron, the very sensitive and strategic military site for the Israeli military. And we're talking about an attack that contained not only the usual rockets that Hezbollah uses. They said that they used Katyusha rockets as well as heavy rockets and also artillery shelling. It means that Hezbollah was planning at least to cause a lot of damage to that sensitive site right there. From what we know from the Israeli side, they are saying that only a minor damage was caused, but of course it is apparently a very important day, and this is coming also when Gallant, the defense minister, is saying that a decision should be taken.
Right, but Belir, I want to ask if this maybe was a one-day kind of reaction specifically to the IDF airstrike that took out apparently very senior field commander of Hezbollah last night.
Well, it's not the first time that the airstrike, the Israeli airstrikes are taking or assassinating Hezbollah top commanders. So maybe we're talking about something else, because the escalation started actually a couple of weeks ago when Israel went inside Rafah. So maybe from Hezbollah's point of view, it is just an excuse to increase their actions against Israel in order to, as they're saying, support Hamas or support the resistance in Gaza. So, of course, this is something that could lead to different situation here. We're still talking, of course, about attacks below the threshold of war, but something like this, of course, if it was successful, this could lead to more hostilities from both sides after all.
All right, Belir Sladin there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. And Yaakov, what about it? I mean, we're seeing rocket attacks on, I think you mentioned early in studio, that almost are on the same latitude as Haifa, although they're in the eastern Galilee as opposed to being all the way on the west side of Israel. Belir suggesting that as Israel goes deeper into Rafah, Hezbollah may respond by shooting its rockets deeper into Israel, which easily could, of course, then erupt into an all-out war.
Definitely. I mean, we have to see what was targeted in this apparent drone attack. This was a very unusual attack. Primarily, the thing that I'm looking out for here is the geography. The unofficial code here between the IDF and Hezbollah has been to keep most of the fighting limited to a geographical area close to the border of both countries. Even when things heat up and become very intense, they usually don't cross certain lines. This kind of attack is a break from that. That's definitely a warning sign that this could escalate by Hezbollah's initiative. As for what causes this, I think, first of all, they're responding to the assassination of a senior field commander
which you mentioned.
in Tyre. And possibly, I mean, they've been signaling that if Rafah escalates, they will escalate as well. They're sort of a mirror image. They tether themselves to the arena in Gaza. And I think Hezbollah is comfortable with its position as it is. The dilemma is really Israel's. And I think Israel, for its part, the war cabinet, is sticking by its decision to continue to prioritize the Gaza arena for now. There is the Rafah stage of this to complete, seizing the Philadelphia corridor. These are key strategic goals. Once that's done, the war cabinet will not be able to delay anymore. It will have to decide, is it going for a ceasefire or is it going for a ground maneuver into southern Lebanon? And they will have to decide one or the other. There will be no middle ground.
Well, I mean, I just briefly, while Israel is still engaged, and you yourself said Israel, the IDF is going to be engaged in Gaza for some time, the strain on the manpower between continuing that operation and a major operation into South Lebanon, that's going to certainly strain the IDF's resources.
Well, once the Rafah stage of this operation is over, the IDF will not need that much manpower to do what they call Stage 3. Stage 3 is just a series of long targeted operations going in, going out. You don't need a whole division for a targeted operation. You don't necessarily even need a brigade sometimes. And we can look to the West Bank as the future of this model that could start taking root. Once the IDF enters that situation for across the Gaza Strip, that will free up up a lot of manpower to go north.
Well, clearly Prime Minister Netanyahu does not want to see the West Bank model recreated in Gaza. He made that quite clear in his comments that we heard earlier. Yaakov Lapin, Yaki Dayan, stay with us. We're going to continue with this special broadcast on I-24 News covering day 222 of Israel at war with its enemies, but also in some degree it appears in conflict within its own government. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a break.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël, the state of emergency and war in Israel. Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Day 222 of Israel at war. Israel at war with its enemies, but also, one could say, perhaps a political war brewing in the government. We discussed earlier Defense Minister Yoav Gallant breaking with Prime Minister Netanyahu over discussion over the issue of the day after in the Gaza Strip. But that's not the only issue on which they are finding themselves in conflict. Also, Yoav Gallant today saying that he will not back the latest maneuver by Prime Minister Netanyahu to deal with the issue of military exemptions for ultra-Orthodox youth. Banuel Hanarat has more on that in this report.
As if Israel's war in Gaza isn't enough, the Israeli government is now put to a new test. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to advance a contentious ultra-Orthodox exemption bill in an effort to keep the political peace and his coalition in place. The Prime Minister's office released a statement declaring that the Israeli parliament would advance the bill in order to help bridge the gaps, also noting that the draft law had passed the first reading in 2022. under the Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett coalition government. The proposed bill would lower the exemption age for compulsory military service for ultra-Orthodox men studying Torah from 26 to 21. Ultra-Orthodox men can avoid the compulsory military service secular Israelis have to do by enlisting in yeshivas to study. Critics say many remain studying longer than they usually would in order to avoid being drafted. The bill had originally been drafted under then Defense Minister Benny Gantz with the plan to help integrate ultra-Orthodox into the workforce. But Gantz, a Netanyahu rival who sits in his war cabinet, warned against the passing of the draft under the pretense that this is Netanyahu's latest political maneuver. Gantz specified that the law as it was presented in 2022 wasn't satisfactory then and is not relevant now in a post-October 7 reality. Siding with Benny Gantz, the head of the opposition Israel Beitenu party, Avigdor Lieberman, also stated that today's realities had changed entirely and that the situation requires a mandatory conscription law for everyone. Ultra-Orthodox conscription has remained an unresolved issue since the beginning of the state, with various governments trying to placate both religious parties and secular ones. When the government announced the second reading of the draft, the ultra-Orthodox parties remained uncharacteristically quiet, sparking conspiracy theories that Netanyahu had coordinated the move with them. According to those same theories, Netanyahu had agreed to this draft, knowing full well war cabinet ministers Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot would not accept it, therefore bringing the issue to a deadlock once again.
Okay, I'm going to read. Now, still with us in studio, we have Yaki Dayan and Yaakov Lapin, and joining us now from Jerusalem is Tzipi Yarom, a journalist for Haredi news outlets. Tzipi, thank you for joining us. Tzipi, help us understand here. 2 years ago, when the Bennett-Lapid government presented this type of bill, the ultra-Orthodox parties, United Torah Judaism, Shas, raised their voices in heated opposition. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's basically going to bring back the same plan, and we're hearing the sound of silence, as Simon and Garfunkel might say. So where do those key ultra-Orthodox parties stand on this latest initiative by Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think that we can all agree that this is just a spin, because I read the law, I read the bill, and there are some clauses in this law that there is no way that Haredi parties are going to agree to it, and this is why they blasted it 2 years ago. So they're just silent now because they use it as a spin. Netanyahu decided to raise it. I don't know if he contacted with them before or not, but for now, it's just a way to suspend the time that they will have to answer to the Supreme Court, which we know this is going to happen next week. So the Supreme Court says you should have a law. Okay, Netanyahu is bringing the law, and this is what he's doing now. He's just using this law to suspend the time until he really has to face it again. So this is really just a spin. There are parts of the law of the bill, though, that are in the new bill that they started preparing, and they would agree to it, but only parts of it. Some parts they will never agree. So
well, tell us, Tzipi, what is the key breaking point for the ultra-Orthodox parties at this point, at a time when, of course, much of Israel sees what's happening in Gaza in the north and says the army needs help from every part of certainly Jewish Israeli society, including the ultra-Orthodox?
So the way I see it, it's 2 points. One, the fact that the yeshivas themselves are in charge of making sure that their students will go to the army and not the army. And the other point is the percentage of those who should go to the army, because the bill states a certain percentage for each yeshiva and a certain percentage for the entire Haredi community of how many boys from the age of 18 to 22 should be enlisted in the army each and every year. And this is where the core discussion is tending.
I am just asking you, Tzipi, because we do see a lot of, and we see reports of young ultra-Orthodox, certainly some of these men saying they've been renewed by what's happened since October 7th to believe that there is value in doing army service. Aryeh Deri, the head of the Shas party, who has been opposed to these laws, coming out with a statement over on Remembrance Day, Memorial Day, saying he sees the value of doing army service. Is there any chance of anything internal coming up in ultra-Orthodox society to change these attitudes coming from below?
So it is happening, but one has to differ between those who sit and learn all day and then they sit and learn in yeshiva, and those who are already out of yeshiva. The voices that we hear saying we should be part of it are actually voices of people who are out of yeshiva and maybe even had an exemption already, and they come and say, hello, I'm working, why shouldn't I be enlisted in the army, although I'm above 26 or something. Most of them still agree that one shouldn't touch those who sit and learn seriously in yeshiva. Most of them wouldn't say it out loud, even if they believe so. It's really a minority who would come and say, hello, you should enlist everybody. So the change is starting from those who did not enlist in the army before, but they say, the army needs me now, so I'll go and I'll do my service, maybe a short service, and then I'll go for reserves duty. Maybe I'll go for, I don't know, being in the border, as some of them already do. But you're not talking about those who still learn in yeshiva. It still remains the core of the debate, whether you take out those who sit and learn and you take them to an active service in the army, or you leave them there and maybe one day they'll come, like those who are now saying, I want to come.
Okay, I'm just going to clarify for some of you, is there are programs more in the what we call the national or modern Orthodox camp that enable people to both serve and learn. But as you say, there are certainly within the ultra-Orthodox community, that's not a model that the leadership is prepared, the rabbinical leadership is prepared to accept there. Tzipi Yaron, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thanks for having me, Khaled.
And I want to go back to you, Yaki, because you related this issue to the discussion about the difference between Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu. Another one of these issues, which is sort of pulling at the fabric of the government, in fact, threatening to break up, we've heard from Benny Gantz, certainly in his party, to break up the fabric of the government at a time when, as we heard on Independence Day, as we heard in every speech seeming on Memorial Day, unity is critical in Israel.
Listen, Kalev, I heard Tzipi speaking and talking the language of October 6th, as if nothing happened on October 7th. One should realize that dramatic things happened in the Israeli army. Israel lost at least 3,000 soldiers now, and they are in need. There are not enough soldiers in Israel, and more than that, people have to serve in the national service as well. So what I would suggest is a much more dramatic law, which is that if somebody is not doing his duties, then he will not able to vote. And I'm not speaking only about the ultra-Orthodox society. I'm speaking about the Arab society and other societies that are not contributing their share to the Israeli society. Things have changed.
That's a fairly radical proposal that's not accepted in many democratic societies.
I agree, but I think that in a very radical situation, you need radical moves. But if you want me to analyze what is happening in the government, what is happening in the government is clear. I mean, Netanyahu is trying to preserve his political power by doing all kinds of maneuvers. He's going to lose, most probably in the near future, Gantz, because Gantz is not going to follow this political maneuvers with the draft law. This is something which is very dramatic to Gantz.
He's already actually come out and said he will reject it.
He will reject it, and he might lose Gallant as well, because Gallant, as he said today, today in the press conference, he's not going to support anything that Gantz is not going to support, any law that Gantz is not going to support. So what is going to happen now, because of this law, is that Gantz most probably is going to leave the coalition, and then you'll have just a very narrow coalition, and you would have a big problem with the Americans. And if Netanyahu is doing that, he prefers to maintain his political power rather than the interest of the Israeli society.
I just want to ask you, though, an argument that the ultra-Orthodox or their leadership makes is the army doesn't really even want us anyway. We won't be of any value to them. Now, that's separate, of course, from the moral argument or how it helps the morale of the general Israeli population to see so many people get draft exemptions.
So it's not true. The army does want them, and it has stated that openly from the chief of staff down. There has been a successful experiment in terms of recruitment with the Netzach Yehuda battalion, which is made up of ultra-Orthodox, although some members of the ultra-Orthodox community may doubt just how Orthodox those soldiers are. And I think that would be wrong, because actually their entire daily routine is set up on a mixture of training, prayer, operations. So it can be done where there's a will, there's a way. And of course, there's the national religious model. This is really about politics, I think, more than anything else, as Yaki said. And I agree, Israeli society has changed so fundamentally after October 7th that people are just not going to put up with the status quo. And this is some kind of political and societal time bomb. If it's not addressed, then, I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see mass demonstrations in the future. I don't think, by the way, that all the ultra-Orthodox can be recruited tomorrow, but I think people need to start seeing a change in the status quo with a serious plan put on the table, because we're in a new reality here.
And certainly I believe next week the Supreme Court will be taking up and giving the government a deadline.
Exactly.
We'll have to see what happens when that happens. Well, let's move now to a more regional news. Since October 7th, Turkey and its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, have been among the staunchest supporters of Hamas, leading to a break in diplomatic and economic relations with Israel. Now, Turkey has also been mentioned as the possible new headquarters for Hamas outside of the Gaza Strip if the group's leadership leaves or is kicked out of the Gulf state of Qatar. But Hamas apparently had long-standing plans to boost its presence there. A new report, supposedly based on documents discovered by the IDF in the Gaza office of a top Hamas official, shows the terror group was planning to build a secret military base in Turkey to coordinate attacks against Israeli targets and those of NATO members. Now, Erdogan has denied the report, but he did up his incitement against Israel today, claiming if it defeated Hamas in Gaza, it would next, quote, set its sights on Anatolia sooner or later, Anatolia being part of Turkey. Erdogan also had this to say.
The Palestinians declared May 15th, the day after the establishment of the State of Israel, as the catastrophe, or Nakba. And every year on May 15th, they renew the hope of returning to their homes and independence. On this day of Nakba, I send my heartfelt greetings to all our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Even Hitler did not carry out the Holocaust, which went down as a dark stain in history so openly. He wasn't that bold.
Yaakov, I think we could assume these documents, this report coming out on these documents is real. I don't know how realistic it would have been for Hamas pre-October 7th to set up some kind of military base in Turkey. But you have to wonder, hearing Recep Tayyip Erdogan after October 7th, that may not be a possibility in the future.
So I'll say two things about that. First of all, I think Erdogan is really projecting his sort of neo-Ottoman Islamist fantasies onto us.
Right.
This idea of expanding and attacking, that's basically, what his ideology calls for. Obviously nothing to do with Israel in the real world. Hamas has had a military operational headquarters in Turkey for years. It was set up several years ago. It was in charge of coordinating terror attacks in the West Bank, as well as helping Hamas in Lebanon build up its power. It was once headed by Salah al-Aruri, the number 2 in Hamas, who we all remember was assassinated in Beirut. So Hamas has a very strong military presence in Turkey, on Turkish soil, with the full encouragement of the Turkish government. This is a major hub for it, together with Qatar and the Gaza Strip. Those are the 3 major hubs of Hamas.
All right, and Yaki, there seems to be almost at this stage no road back for Israel and Turkey, certainly as long as Erdogan is its leader.
This is accurate. I mean, I had the dubious pleasure of meeting Erdogan a few times. He's an anti-Semite. His ideology is Islamic fundamentalism. He clearly supports Hamas.
And yet Israel was ready to deal with him.
That was a big mistake, and I thought then, and I even wrote about that was a big mistake, because Erdogan wouldn't change then, and he wouldn't change now. This is his ideology. He really supports that. He used it for internal political things, bashing Israel, but also he has conviction in this hate for Israel. And as long as Erdogan is there, unfortunately, our relations with Turkey are doomed. Only when there is a replacement, then we can renew the excellent relations that we had with Turkey.
Briefly, yeah.
It makes me wonder, what Israel can do about building new alliances with the Kurds.
All right. Well, that may be one of the future options Israel looks to. Looks in the regional implications of what's happened, of course, since October 7th. Yaki Dayan and Yaakov Lapin, thank you for joining us again on the special edition on I-24 News. Now, with more than 7 months since the advent of that horrific October 7th attacks, a new play that has hit the stage in New York City, depicting some of the human stories on that fateful night, has started production. Adam Bernitz has that story.
From the flames of death to the stage. More than 7 months since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, a new play depicting the brutal terror attack on Israel on October 7th has premiered at the Actors Temple Theatre in New York City, off-Broadway. Titled October 7th, the play is based on first-hand accounts collected from survivors of the attack, including soldiers and families affected by the events.
All interviews we did, we interviewed about 20 people. We boiled their stories down to about 13 different stories. Some of the stories are connected, some of them are standalone, but all of them tell, it's kind of like a TikTok of October 7th. And, there's obviously it's tragic, but there's heroism, there's survivors, there's resilience, there's hope, and there's even humor.
Actors portray various individuals, such as mothers who hid in fear for hours, uncertain about their family's fate, and young people at the Nova Music Festival who witnessed the violence and fled for their lives.
As an actor, learning the lines, what was incredibly difficult is just making sure to pay homage to exactly the way that these people said what they said. And then also there's the fact that we're dealing with these very recent and very traumatic experiences. All of us during the show, before the show, and afterwards are inundated with videos and footage of what happened, what these people saw, and the atrocities that they lived through.
Art can change the world. And, all we can really hope is to educate audiences and hope that they welcome a new perspective and come out of here learning something that they might not have known before. And as a Jewish actor, I just always find it's really important to bring representation to Jewish people, Jewish stories, and hopefully people can find a bit of themselves reflected on this stage as well.
Director Jeffrey Cantor highlighted the play's focus on the human side of the tragedy.
The fact that we have to get back to the core of what the issue was on that day, and that is that people, innocent people, women, children, old people, were brutally and savagely attacked by a jihadist death cult with no other, as you hear in the play, they had no other purpose but to kill people, to kill Jews and Israelis, some of whom, they weren't all Jewish.
And after lights fade and curtains fall, a powerful message is left behind about the human spirit in the face of adversity.
So that certainly looks like it's worth a night at the theater if you're in New York. Let's try to end this program on a positive note. Of course, Israelis yesterday and many others celebrated Israel Independence Day. Our Spanish language correspondent, Nicole Michel, host of our Spanish language program, took the day to visit the Museum of the Father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, in Jerusalem. Let's take a look at that.
Flor, this place is amazing. It's the first part of the museum and represents Paris at the end of the 19th century.
Yes, exactly. Theodor Herzl was born in Budapest in 1860. With his family, he moved to Vienna, where he begins to study law and starts to dedicate himself to journalism and writing. He moves to Paris as a correspondent of a very famous newspaper called Nouvelle Presse, and there he covers the Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus was a Jewish officer in the French military who was accused of treason with the allegation of having sold secret documents to the enemy forces, the German army. From then, Herzl started to get involved with Zionist matters, as anti-Semitism was on its rise in Europe, and especially in France, which was then considered the bastion of freedom. Death to the Jews, the French were chanting, and not only to Dreyfus. All that generated a feeling in Herzl. At the public ceremony of humiliation to Dreyfus, he hears the people chanting, "Death to the Jews."
It's an intimate place, a recreation of the first Jewish Zionist Congress in Basel. It feels as if we were there, at that moment. 2,000 years was what it took to gather, dream, propose, and succeed in creating the State of Israel.
We have to remember that at that time, it was not common to talk about Zionism, to return to the land of Israel. Then suddenly comes Herzl and starts to gather all of these people to talk about how to create a nation, a state for the Jewish people. It was revolutionary.
And Flor, reflecting on all the hardship to successfully create a state, do you think that nowadays, 2024, and for us as new immigrants, you from Argentina and I'm from Venezuela, in moments so different of changes in Israel, can we keep dreaming and strengthening our Jewish identity and showing it to the world?
Well, there's a very well-known phrase from Herzl. If you will it, it's no dream. He brings us the idea to keep dreaming, to pursue the dreams, and have hope. His dream of having our own state became reality, so we must keep dreaming and imagining how to create a better country in Israel.
This is the original office of Theodor Herzl, which was brought from Vienna to Jerusalem. It's incredible, Flor. The original details of a man who marked history and the State of Israel.
Exactly. It was brought from Vienna to Jerusalem. All we see here is original. All books here were read by Herzl, and they were all originally owned by him. There are books of history, geography, politics, and even a Bible, despite the fact that he didn't know how to read Hebrew well. There's also a coin bank of the Jewish National Fund, an organization whose mission was to buy lands in Israel. He used this coin bank to ask for donations from every person who came to visit him to help the cause.
He was someone who had his businesses, who had his money, but he donated it all to the Zionist cause.
Exactly. Herzl used all his money with the Zionist movement, in its congresses, travels, meetings. For that reason, when Herzl passed away, his family, 3 children, and his wife were left with almost no money to sustain themselves. Julie, his wife, decides to sell all of the objects we have here, and David Wolfson, Herzl's friend, decides to buy it all to help her. Herzl had 3 children, Polina, Hans, and Trude. He was barely at home. He had to travel and promote the congresses all alone. His children made him a doily, which we can see at this table, red and white. It was something small that he used to carry around everywhere. So despite the fact that he wasn't with them for a long time, he had them present in a way.
And Flor gifted me with this book, The Jewish State. And there's an interesting chapter here, Palestine or Argentina. It would be necessary to enlighten Argentina on the intrinsic difference of the new Jewish immigration. Palestine is our ever-memorable historic home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. Flor, now you are here, from Buenos Aires to Jerusalem. Have you ever wondered, as a Jew, to be anywhere but in the land of Israel?
Estas tierras de Israel.
Not only in Argentina, but there was a proposal to make a Jewish state in Uganda in Africa. As Jews, we declined all of these ideas because we want to be in this land, this place.
A museum also worth a visit. That ends our broadcast for this evening. I want to say a word of departure for Hannah Friedman, one of our producers who's leaving I-24 News and who has worked. You've seen her work